Okay, if you can hear us, go ahead and type in on the chat and let us know that you can hear us. Welcome to Noble Warrior. This is a place where entrepreneurs talk about what it takes to create a life of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. We're gonna talk about mindset, mental models, actionable tactics, such that you can take everything that's shared here and go out and create a life of meaning and fulfillment for yourself. My name is CK Lin, former biomedical engineering PhD researcher, director for the University of California, startup executive turned startup executive mentor. I've been on a quest to understand what it takes to have a life of meaning and purpose. My next guest, he is a sales keynote speaker. He's the author of Better Selling Through Storytelling. He is a TEDx speaker with over 1 million views on YouTube. He is the course creator of Better Selling Through Storytelling at gofrominvisible to irresistible.com. He's known as the pitch whisperer. Please welcome John Livesay.
Thanks, CK.
How was box breathing for you?
It's great. I love the fact that you set an intention and ground. I tell people that's such an important thing to do before anything, whether it's a meeting to pitch or a date or an important phone call. We have to be in the present moment to be fully present.
Do you have any practices that you use yourself as a way to get present in the moment? Because I know that you have a very busy life, you have a lot of things on your calendar, you're highly sought after. What are some of your practices as a way to be present for yourself?
Well, I watched the Amy Cuddy TED talk about this holding the superhero pose. Have you seen that or heard about this?
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this research behind it that your testosterone goes up even if you're a woman, and your cortisol stress level goes down. And doctors do it before surgeries. And if you shoot some baskets and then hold that pose for 2 minutes, you'll shoot more baskets. So a lot of people think, wow, that 2 minutes is a long time to hold it. So what I've done is add my own recipe to that, which is I work with my clients on stacking their moments of certainty. I have them write down 2 or 3 times in their life when they knew they nailed something, whether they got a job offer or they had a goal happen or they got some great feedback from somebody. And when we program our mind to put that in our head, like airplanes are stacked at the airport by the air traffic control people, you're stacking those moments of certainty while holding the superhero pose, and then you go live. It's a real way to boost your confidence and make sure that those fear thoughts are not taking over.
I don't know if you ever done any kind of neuro-linguistic programming or any kind of a transformation. Oh, you have? Okay, great. So when you are thinking about these moments where you have certainty, do you try to inject or infuse emotions into it, adding
Yes,
fuel to that? Like, how do
definitely.
you do? Okay, so say more about how you actually do that in terms of the emotionality aspect of it.
Well, two things you touched on. As a speaker, it's my job to tap into all the different ways people process information, whether it's visual, kinesthetic feeling, or auditory. So I have to make sure that I'm not just staying in my little sweet spot, which tends to be visual, but also phrase things in a way that people who are auditory, like, does that sound like something you could do? Does that sound like the kind of journey you would like to go on? Or when we trust our gut, we have more confidence. So I'm using a lot of variations of that, speaking to a big group because not everybody is the same. And so what I do with my clients is not only do I have them write down those moments, but I have them write down a feeling associated with that. So when I won a gold medal when I was a kid swimming, I felt proud. When I got hired at this job, I felt elated. So you're stacking not just the thoughts, but the feelings that go with it that you want to be feeling as you go into your next big meeting or interview, whatever it is.
I I asked that question because, well, I'm an INTJ. For those of you that don't know what that means, is in a Myers-Briggs test, personality test, out of the 16 of them, INTJ is one of the most cerebral ones, right? So, as an INTJ, I think I look at the world through systems and processes, but in terms of emotions, actually, it's a skill that I have to actively cultivate. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, Have you ever dealt with any INTJs who's like super cerebral, but at the same time who wants to cultivate this skill set of being a better speaker, a better storyteller?
It actually happens to be my sweet spot. My ideal clients tend to be very tech oriented and left brain oriented and very well educated and smart in the technology of how something works. And that can include not just selling a medical tech device, but also architects. They're very much into the square footage and all that left brain stuff. And when they had an interview coming up, they were told, one of my clients, that they were gonna hire the firm that they liked the most because the project took 6 years, not who had the best designs, because they felt like you could all do the work, otherwise you wouldn't be in the final three. And that's when I was called in to help that team work on their likability, and because they literally didn't know where to start.
All right, perfect. Great. Pause. So speaking to the younger CK who's super cerebral, or these the clients of yours, very cerebral, who thinks that, hey, my work should speak for itself. Let me just focus on delivering the information. Let me just deliver like a professor, right? For someone like that, how do you coach them to tap into their emotions, their elation, their enthusiasm, and so forth? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, sometimes I have to get them out of their head in a variety of ways. And so I just keep asking questions until I get them to describe an experience where they are, in fact, feeling something. So one of my clients, Cole, he was very left brain, cerebral, former military guy, and he had trouble delivering his pitch with any passion. And so I found that he loved playing soccer. And so I said, what does it feel like when you kick that ball and you make the winning goal? And finally, he started having a little enthusiasm in his voice. And so I used that as a frame of reference to say, you need to bring that same feeling to when you're talking about this project. And so they had some frame of reference that was just categorized. And listen, I have complete empathy for this, because when I was in my 20s, the first time I went to therapy, the therapist said, just once in this hour, try to start a sentence with I feel instead of I think. And I was like, oh, I wasn't aware I was doing that. And, it was like literally a new skill. Like, can I see all those pictures of all the feelings so I can figure out which one I am in touch with? Because EQ, emotional intelligence, is not typically taught in school. And there's all kinds of research for you left brain people that proves that you are actually more successful with a higher EQ than your IQ.
Yeah, for sure. So for the younger CK, the cerebralists that are listening to this, I wanted to underline something. There's nothing wrong with the way that you are. What we're talking about here is about effectiveness, because the rest of the world may not be as cerebral as you are. If you want to tap into who they are as a human being, if you want to connect with them, connect with their emotions, right? So one. Two, we're not asking you to artificially be someone else, be a court jester or someone that you're not. All we're asking you to do is to tap into the emotion that makes you excited, that makes you passionate, that have you be like, oh, that's why I do the thing that I do. So that you can connect with that. Would you agree with that, John?
Yes, being your authentic self is key, but you also want to work on being the best version of your authentic self, as opposed to saying, well, this is who I am, I can't change. I believe everyone can improve on a lot of different skills. But I think what I've learned about myself that might be helpful for others is that part of the reason we like to lead with data and facts is because we don't want to be vulnerable. We're not sure it's safe to let anybody in to our inner world. So what that does is it prevents intimacy on any level, business or personal, when you don't let people in and know that you're scared, frustrated, angry, sad. And so the first step is you have to figure out what you're feeling, then be able to express it in the moment as opposed to holding on to it for 2 weeks. And go, when you said that, that hurt my feelings, or that made me mad. And then you have to realize that um, when you express feelings, it doesn't mean that everything gets destroyed. That's, I think, a big fear a lot of people have. If I really told this person how I felt, it would end the relationship as opposed to making it closer. Therefore, I'm just going to stick to the facts and figures. And unfortunately, not only does it not feel intimacy, nothing you say is really memorable. And the best way to connect with people is to show you don't have it all together all the time, and to take down your mask.
Yeah, for sure. I love that we had the dynamics, the recovering cerebralist and someone who's a coach who coaches cerebralist. So that's really great. From my personal point of view, having a podcast has been a tremendous journey for me because part of the beginning part of my journey in episode 1, it was a lot about, let me just present my best self and let me just the highlight reel of who I am versus actually being a human being, right? So in the beginning, if you go back and listen, it sounds a lot like these monk from the mountaintop coming down and just share like the solutions, the wisdom that I figure out in the world. And then episode, I'm about 90 episodes in, and I can get to actually have fun with you and be a human being and just show hey, I don't have a perfect life. I think all human beings, none of us are perfect, but all of us are imperfectly perfect. Whatever journey that we're on is whatever journey that we're on. So I so appreciate you sharing that.
Well, when I was working on my TEDx talk, the expert I hired was a specialist in giving a TEDx talk, which is very different than giving a talk in front of a sales team, which is what I normally do. He said, "Your method is your message." And I thought, oh, so that journey to discover where you stumbled, something you don't want to share, or those feelings that you normally don't talk about, becomes part of your message, because that's what pulls people in. And I think that was a big aha for me. I remember once I had been in a car accident and I had to wear one of those neck braces. And a friend of mine was performing, and I was going into the theater to hear her sing, and I thought, oh, I'm going to take this off. I don't want to draw attention to myself. And um, my doctor said to me, "Are you crazy? You're supposed to wear that to keep your neck from getting worse." And what was going on in your head? And I was like, oh, I didn't want to look not perfect. I didn't want to go, oh, what happened? And I just wanted her to, see the best version of me, even if in fact that wasn't the case. So it's been a big learning curve for me to let people go, oh, yeah, this is what happened. I'm flawed. I mean, when I go back, when I was in college, I had a job at an airline in the summers working as a ticket agent when I needed extra help. And back then, they would judge us on our appearance. We literally get graded. Are your shoes signed? Is your hair the right length? Is your tie tied properly? On and on and on. And, I was lifeguarding in the morning, and then I go do that job at night. And then I went to college, and I, grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and went to school down in Champaign-Urbana. And then they reached out to me when I came home during the holiday break and said, hey, it's a busy time. I can have you come back in. And I was so insecure, CK, that I thought, oh, I don't have a tan like I did in the summer. And I've gained 10 pounds from being in, freshman 10. I'm not going to be enough. I was totally putting my self-worth on my appearance and not my skills as helping people, get their bags checked or whatever. And once that becomes your thing, your lesson to learn until you heal it, you just keep replaying it in different scenarios. To the point where I was working for Conde Nast, which publishes a lot of fashion magazines, GQ, Wired, Vanity Fair, Vogue, etc. And you were expected to look like you'd stepped out of those pages of those magazines when you were in the hallways and constantly making sales calls to clients. So I was like, I just went from one place where I got judged on my appearance to the next.
So, okay, so Well, at what point was the awakening moment for you to realize, like, well, this environment doesn't really cultivate my self-image. It's not a place that I want to, stay any longer. Was there an awakening moment for you to realize that at some point?
Well, there's a story, of course, not for the moment to have any context. So I'm at my career at Conde Nast, doing really well. 2008, the economy tanks. They lay off 30% of the staff in New York and everybody in an outside office, and I was in LA at the time. And that was a big, jolt. Anytime we get disrupted, job loss, death of a loved one, divorce, moving, it makes you, pandemic, makes you sort of stop a little bit. And I thought, wow, I've got to reinvent myself and learn how to sell digital ads, not just print. And a friend of mine said, oh, it's kind of like silent movie stars. Some of them made it to talkies and some didn't. And I'm like, oh, all right. So that gave me some, I lost my job, but not my identity, was my first aha moment of that. And then ironically, 2 years later, I got rehired back and ended up winning Salesperson of the Year for the entire company. And I would say that was the defining moment where I went, I'm the same person, whether I'm getting laid off or winning this award. I got to get off this self-esteem roller coaster. I'm only feeling good about myself if I'm winning things and my numbers are up, or bad about myself if I'm not making my quota or getting laid off. And so that's been part of the journey. And I think one of the things I really want to tell the younger version of both of ourselves is you don't really ever arrive at one thing and go, okay, I've got that healed. I'm never going to have that issue come up again. It just comes up in different forms. I remember when I was speaking at the Coca-Cola Summit the first time, and I was looking at the other speakers, and the imposter syndrome kicked up. And I was like, ooh, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. My book isn't on the New York Times bestseller like all these other speakers. And all my not good enough stuff comes up. And then I realized, wait a minute. While I'm not hired to, quote, be an underwear model, nobody cares how I, look as a speaker. They are concerned about my content. And then I thought, well, do I care where a speaker went to school, or do I care how many books they sold? No. I care about how I feel listening to them. Am I touched? Do I learn anything? And then I went, that's why I got picked. And so it's so insidious, this fear, ego, judgment stuff of ourselves, that we can feel like you're not enough with your appearance. And then sort of you heal that a little bit, and then it comes up in another way, in this case, the imposter syndrome. So hopefully that's helpful.
I mean, definitely, it's what you're addressing is the human condition, right? I mean, through evolution biology, we are social animals, and in any kind of social organization, the egoic mind wants to know, where do we stand in the hierarchy of things, right? What's our status? In a athletic community, it could be your athletic ability. In terms of entrepreneurial community, it could be your net worth, right? Jeff Bezos, when he speaks, standing in front of a crowd, everyone knows he's the alpha because his worth of whatever billions of dollars, and whatever. But so our survival instinct is always trying to jostle, like, do we belong? Am I gonna be isolated and then would I die, right? This is a very primal instinct that we have. So I'm curious to know, as you are now aware of this internal grappling, how do you calm yourself down in the event where the imposter syndrome is being triggered, in the event where, like, oh my God, they're more beautiful or whatever, than I am? What methods do you have as a way to, again, come back to the center and neutrality?
Well, one method is somewhat intellectual, so you might like this, which is just realizing that the fight or flight response that you were referring to earlier, where do we fit in the hierarchy? That's what causes so many people to have a fear of speaking, because our primal brain wants to be part of the tribe and the herd. And if you're separated from the herd, that's when you get kicked off in the jungle. And so when you stand up in front of an audience, your brain's going, the herd's out there. You're all up here by yourself. What you're doing, this is not safe. So just that awareness is part of my method. And I talk about, we get butterflies in our stomach. So I go back to what is physically going on. Adrenaline's being released. And I tell people the goal isn't to get rid of the butterflies in your stomach, but to get those butterflies to fly in formation. And when we get the negative energy out of our stomach and into the room by making a gesture, and we get out of our head worrying about whether people like us or not, and we come back to our intention is I'm here to serve and help and inspire and give them some new tools, then the nervous energy shifts from being scared to being excited. We just go, oh, game on. This is my Super Bowl moment. This is my Olympic moment. And, everything's on full alert. Because the difference between being scared and excited is very subtle, and it's about us to reframe and label it what we want.
Yeah, I like that. I was doing a lot of research before our interview today, and I was watching a lot of different talks that you actually made. And one of my favorites is the one when you actually talked about your move, how life was an adventure, right?
Yes.
Before you moved from LA to Austin. Can you maybe tell that story? And I want to go in deeper on the maybe the mechanics, how you actually deliver that story. So tell us that story.
Well, I decided that I wanted to change where what I call Act 3 was going to take place. Because again, I think in terms of everything as a story, and we're the director of our own movie, and we can recast it, we can change the location. And since I didn't have a job that I was going to every day like I did so many years in LA, I thought, I can live anywhere. I looked at a lot of different places, and when I landed on Austin for a variety of reasons, not just because it's less expensive and no state income tax, but the vibe. Keep it weird. A lot of tech startups, a lot of music, great food, all of those things. No winters that are cold with snow. Were part of that process. But moving to a place you've not really spent time at and don't know a lot of people in is a bit of an adventure. And I also wasn't even sure when I should sell my place in LA. Well, should I wait till official spring in March? And I said, no, we're not having bad rainstorms. I'm going to put it on the market in January, and then I don't know how long it's going to take to sell. So I'll figure out where I'm going once that happens. It could be, months. But it happened to sell in 2 days. And I thought, oh, I got to be out in 30 days now. So I've got to figure out where I'm going to land. And I was looking at some places downtown. I thought, I'm not sure for that kind of money. Maybe I could rent a house. And then I found this amazing condo to rent across from a 300-acre park. And I thought, And the woman said to me, well, this won't stay. You're coming to visit in February, but it won't be available then. And she showed me on her phone, Facebook, what the place looked like, and I bought it. I released it literally sight unseen. So that whole process of, selling a place, and there's all kinds of bumps in the road where the seller might want to back out, and you're like, and how do I adjust to that? And how do I stay flexible and fluid through the whole process? And then again, just trust that it's all going to work out. Was the journey of that adventure. Yeah. And of course, now with the pandemic, people go, wow, you had amazing timing to get out right before all that hit. You landed, and you couldn't do a 3-day car ride from LA to Texas with your sister now. It wouldn't be the same, and it would have been harder to sell. So all of now the analogy is like Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford, being chased by that boulder. that's kind of the way I feel that it was happening. Literally, March 1st was when my lease started here, and shortly after that is when it started shutting down. And I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And it was about trusting my gut, I would say. Not that I'm able to foresee the future. Um, so it's been a bit of a challenge because moving is stressful, and not knowing a lot of people is stressful, and then trying to make new friends when people are not going out and things are closed. So it's been a little bit of a double whammy. But now, several 6 months or more into it, it's become a way to go, okay, I can still, whether I was in LA or not, I would still be having Zoom calls with my friends. So everything's changed, and the LA I knew doesn't even exist anymore. A lot of restaurants are closed, they're not opening back. So I think when things changed, whether it was being laid off from my job or leaving LA after all those years, that we can't look back because what we're missing doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why I like this particular talk that you did. Well, one is the subject matter, right? You talked about a lot about letting go, surrender, serendipity, right? And these are all subjects that I'm interested in these days, right? And there, so in my mind, there's a lot of wisdom in that, and also juxtaposition on top of, what we're dealing with in pandemic, right? A lot of people are now reinventing themselves, reinventing their life, reinventing the relationship, reinventing where they live. So that's also very interesting. And I also love the way that how you deliver it, because from my point of view, it's the most relaxed that you are. Because I know you do different kind of talks, right? The sales talks, the in front of the media, TV,
Right.
and then this is the most relaxed. And this, from my point of view, is the most authentic. You're just being who you are. You didn't really not care is not the right word, but you're the most relaxed is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's progression on my speaking career. That talk is more recent than the TEDx talk. So that's part of the goal as a speaker is to let more of your message. You get the more you do anything, you get more and more comfortable, relaxed in it. It's like learning how to drive a car, right? I remember my dad used to take me out to the church parking lot, and we practiced starting and driving the car around. And before I went to driver's ed school, and then I went to driver's ed school and got the permit. And he's like, "Okay, we're sitting in the driveway in the car, and I had this checklist I have to do before I start the car. Go check the mirror. Got to do it." He goes, "Oh, for God's sakes, just start the car like you have 100 times. You're overthinking it. Do I turn the key and then put my foot on the accelerator?" And so any skill, whether it's speaking or driving, stick or whatever it is, continues to get to the place where we're so confident that the confidence flows, which allows us to be more relaxed.
Perfect. I love that. So we do talk about the four stages of learning: the unconscious incompetence, the conscious incompetence, to the conscious competence, to the unconscious competence. So I love that you talk about that. So if you don't mind using this particular talk and actually dissect how you come about this, I think it would be very educational, very informative for anyone else who's listening to us, of someone who's the younger version of John, the CKs, who says, "Oh my God, I'm a cerebralist. I think I have a story. How do I pick a topic? How do I find the beats of the story? How do I, go from conscious incompetence to conscious competence?" Right? Let's maybe talk about that a bit. So if you don't mind kind of going from the very, very top of why you want to deliver this talk to the topic selection and so on and so forth, so we can narrow it down accordingly, if you don't mind doing that.
No. Since you're a cerebralist, I'm going to give you something you probably like, which is I reverse engineer my
I'm
talk.
a recovering cerebralist.
I reverse engineer my talks.
Yes.
So I write down these three questions. What do I want the audience to think? What do I want the audience to feel? And what do I want them to do? And I work on the ending of my talk first. I answer those three questions. I'm like, oh, okay. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to think that they shouldn't be afraid of change, and I want them to look at their own life and see how they could reframe seeing something as an adventure as opposed to just resisting any form of change, whether it's moving or losing a job or whatever it is. And then I work on my opening. And that probably is what I spend the most amount of time on, whether it's my book, my TEDx talk. You've got to grab people in that first 90 seconds and pull them in with why they should care to listen. And so don't waste time with thank you for this opportunity. I'm excited to be here. Don't waste time by saying I'm going to tell you a story. Jump into the story. And then now that I have my opening and my closing, I write down what are my 3 key takeaways. And ideally there is some kind of alliteration. What if life is meant to be fast and fluid and flexible? And then I craft stories under each of those bullet points. And then within crafting a story, there's a structure to what that story has. And we can get into that if you want. But I think that's a good place to pause to give you a sense of the overall structure. Yes? Which is what you were asking.
Yeah, no, I really love that. Design from with the end in mind. What do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? Right? Is that accurate recap?
Correct.
With that in mind, and then what are the 3 main takeaways? Alliteration and so forth. So
and the opening. Don't forget the opening.
Oh, that's right. You see,
you have a great opening.
The hook, right? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot we can go there. So let's actually emphasize, underline the importance of having a good hook. One of my mentors, he said, the internet, right, the world today is, you have an infinite shelf of possibilities. How do you stand out from that? So I'm curious to know, when you are thinking about the hook, the opening, what goes in your mind as a way to stand out? Because one may say a few different schools of thought, right? One may say just be loud, be crazy, right? But that's not your brand. That's not what you do. So I'm curious to know.
Or be open with a joke. Unless you're Jerry Seinfeld,
that's right.
I wouldn't recommend that.
That's right. So what would you say to someone who may have all these things? They are clear about think, feel, and do. They are clear about maybe the main lessons, the wisdom. How do you help them stand out in the infinite, store shelf of the internet?
Well, Plato said storytellers rule the world. And it's even more relevant today because he didn't have to compete against the distractions of the internet when he was saying that. So I am a firm believer that stories are what makes us memorable, and it also lets people into your story. When you become a great storyteller, people see themselves in the story with you, and you're no longer having to worry about, am I being loud enough or using all these gimmicks to pull people in. A good story has a certain structure to it, which I'm happy to go into. And when you use that structure, people lean in and want to hear what's next.
Well, it's perfect. I'm speaking to a storyteller coach, a master storyteller, and someone who aspired to be a storyteller. It wasn't until very, very recently, because for the longest time, I thought to myself, I'm doing this podcast because I'm a curious person. I'm just an interviewer. And it wasn't until just a few months ago, really, a friend of mine told me that, hey, CK, you're a storyteller. And that blew my mind, because I'm just asking questions. What do you mean I'm a storyteller? Well, you ask questions as a way to draw out the story within your guest. And that makes you a storyteller. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So ever since then, I am learning the mechanics of storytelling. So I read books like Story by Robert McKee. I'm looking at other master podcast hosts and how they tell their story, how they draw the best. The Howard Sterns, the Larry Kings, the Cal Fussman, and all these, Tim Ferriss, all these people that I admire. So I'm curious to know, what would you say to someone like me, who's an aspirational storyteller, who may not be well versed in the unconscious confidence stage in telling stories better?
Well, first I would say that the myth that storytellers are born and it's just a natural skill that you either have it or you don't is not true. Anyone can learn how to tell a good story. Now, the level of where you get to is up to you and how much practice you have. And the fact that you prepared so much for this interview shows me you've got those skills. Arthur Ashe, the famous tennis pro, said, the key to success is confidence, and the key to confidence is preparation. And I know that was one of my keys in my sales career, the amount of preparation I did compared to other people. And when I interviewed Jay Samit on my podcast, and he called me a journalist, I was like, it was like somebody calling you a storyteller. Journalist? Yeah, podcast hosts are journalists. And you did more preparation than any other podcast host, the questions you asked me about my book. So I know what you feel like when you're like, what? I'm a journalist? Or what? I'm a storyteller? So it's just opening ourselves up to all kinds of possibilities instead of thinking of ourselves as I just do this. Especially with my background in ad sales, the editors and the ad sales people were not allowed to talk to each other because they didn't want a car company who was advertising to go to the sales rep and say, hey, tell the editors to put our car on the cover of the magazine. So it was church and state. And ironically, you brought up Cal Fussman, who's a good friend of mine. He has a wonderful podcast called Big Questions. And he interviewed me on that show because he used to be a journalist at Esquire, and I was selling ads for competitive magazines. So we broke down, and he interviewed Gorbachev, and he said, let's break down that wall, like Gorbachev did with Reagan, between advertising and editors. And he said, I now have to sell myself, John, as a salesperson, and I don't know how to sell. I said, but you know how to ask good questions. And selling is nothing more than storytelling. And so that whole interview, I worked with him on all the stages of what a sales call is, from building rapport, like he had to as a journalist, to uncovering a need, which it was all about questions, to presenting something in a story format, which is what he would write. And his big aha moment was using storytelling to overcome objection. And then, of course, closing the sale. Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, hierarchy of needs, he said, if the only tool in your toolbox is the hammer, you tend to go around looking for nails to hit. And so salespeople think, well, I just gotta keep asking, you want to buy, you want to buy, you buy. But when you tell a great story, the question simply is, does that sound like the kind of journey you'd like to go on? And so that was mind-boggling for Cal. And then we actually shared a stage together at that Coca-Cola CMO summit I was talking about, on his emphasis on asking the right questions and mine on telling those stories and combining them together. So that was quite a wonderful event to go to.
Yeah, I love that. So anything else? So one thing is be open to a new identity. So in my case, all of a sudden I'm a storyteller. It's like, I didn't know that. So boom, right there, right? So be open to a new identity. In your case, you're a journalist. What other tactical or framework or even mindset things would you advise someone who is an aspirational storyteller? So yes, storytelling is a learnable skill. I truly believe that too. I believe that we can learn anything. And we do have, maybe some people may have the affinity for joke telling or storytelling or something, but everything can be learned. So there's that. Be open to a new identity. Anything else around the advice to younger CK or even the current CK who wants to be better at storytelling?
Well, since you probably like structure, let me tell you what the structure I use and teach to become a storyteller. The first part is exposition. You really got your journalist hat on, the who, what, where. The more details you give and paint that picture, the more people are in the story. And then you need to describe a problem. Every story has some kind of challenge going on. You also have to realize, who's the hero in the story? Is it me or somebody else? Is my role in the story a Sherpa, or am I the hero of the story? It's a lot more interesting if you're the Sherpa helping somebody else. So don't make yourself the hero, I would say. And if you do, you need to figure out how that is relevant to people listening to it. And the better you describe a problem, the better other people think you have their solution. And then you come up with the solution. And the secret sauce to any good story, CK, is the resolution. And that's what most people don't do. So imagine the Wizard of Oz ending when Dorothy got in the balloon to go back to Kansas, and the end. We would have lost that whole resolution of her back in bed. You were there and you were there, and what I learned is there's no place like home, and all of that needs to be in a story, that resolution. What is life like for people after they've worked with you or they've hired you?
So okay, so kind of like the heaven, the picturesque heaven, right? The more concrete you can paint a picture for that, like what's it like after they work with you. If you can concretize that more, then you can really draw them in better. Can you give us some more examples of what potential resolutions could look like? Because that word can be, mean many things to many people.
Sure. I'll give you a couple. I was working with a healthcare tech company, and I was asking them, what are you saying to get people to buy your equipment? Doctors and hospitals. Oh, our equipment makes the surgery go 30% faster. Sounds like a cerebralist to me. And I said, well, there's no story there. And so I pulled out the details. What does it even mean? What's the surgery length without your equipment? Oh, 2.5 hours. So 30% faster, what? An hour and a half. All right, so we go to the exposition. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins is down at Long Beach Memorial 6 months ago. Okay, now we're in the scene. When he's using our equipment, and he can go out to the patient's family in the waiting room. And if you've ever been in that situation, you know every minute feels like an hour. He came out an hour earlier than expected to tell them the good news that their loved one did not have cancer from the scope surgery and was going to be okay. And then the doctor turned to the Olympus rep and said, that's why I became a doctor, for moments like that. So now the salesperson tells that story to another doctor, and that doctor sees himself in that story and says, that's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. So the resolution in that story was the doctor saying, that's why I became a doctor. If you just ended with the solution of, but you see how I described that problem in such detail and even pulled you in? If you've ever been in this situation, now you're really in the where you were waiting for someone you love to come out of surgery, and if that hasn't happened to you in your lifetime, it probably will, or you certainly know someone who had that experience. And so that's the empathy part of showing I really understand what this problem feels like. So the fact that the doctor comes out an hour earlier, he's the hero in this story, and your equipment is the Sherpa that made him the hero, getting to come out an hour early and relieve those family members of that torture waiting.
Let me change spot a bit. The sun is literally shining right on me.
Okay.
Thank you for
because you're getting enlightened talking to me.
I am totally. Thank you for that. Literal enlightenment right here. It's the first time this happened. That's great. Thank you for dancing in this conversation with me. 1 second. All right, perfect. We'll make it as good as it will be. So, and then we'll cut it out. So I appreciate you sharing that, but it's not an overnight like, hey, one session with John, let's hone into the heart, the soul of this particular story, right? Can you share with us a little bit about the journey going from there's a billion things that we can talk about mechanistically to benefits to features, get to the soul of a story right there and then? Because I'm sure it's a process.
It is a process. In fact, I've turned my book into an online course that takes people through that process in small 10-minute increments. and then quizzes them. And then I work with them in a private Facebook group where they can practice telling these stories in such a way, because whoever tells the best story is the one that's going to win the sale or get hired. So it doesn't take as long as you might think. It's obviously not one session, but first is the awareness that you need to become a storyteller, and then figuring out, how do I take a boring case study and turn it into a case story, or how do I take my own story of origin and make that interesting and compelling so that people want to connect with me. So that story of origin, what made you get into whatever it is you're doing, and the story of origin of your company, like, the story of origin of Noble Warrior, there's a story there, plus your own story of origin, and then, the story of people you've helped. So first you tell your story, then you tell the story of your company, even if it's just a one-person company, and then you tell the story of other people you've helped. So I help people figure out how to tell all of those stories through the whole process of selling, so that it makes you magnetic and you don't feel pushy anymore.
Magnetic versus pushing. I love that. Yeah. That's a nice contrast, nice visual. Yeah, so if any of you are interested, definitely go from invisible to irresistible.com and check out more of that with John. I want to ask you some. Let's see, we can go both mechanical or the inner game of it. Let's dance a bit there. Well, let me ask you this. So, how do you refine that sensibility for a good story? Because you obviously, how do I articulate it? A key part of the skill is the mechanics of storytelling, right? So there's an aspect of it. And certainly a lot of people do want to know more about that. But I'm also curious about the metacognition aspect of it. How do I know that, how do I hone my sensibility for a good story? Because out of 1 billion stories I could possibly tell, maybe only a handful that are good stories that will forward my intention the most, right? So can you share a little bit more about that, the sensibility of choosing a good story?
That's a very common challenge people come to me with. I've got so many stories, I don't know which ones to use or which ones to pick, what order to put them in. And a lot of it has to do with, if you're talking to somebody one-on-one, you want to think of your mind like a jukebox. And you can push certain numbers and letters to pull out a certain story at a time. So your goal is to have as many stories as possible ready to go. So in the moment, you can decide which one is the best fit for that person. And if you're presenting in front of a large audience, like I do, then you do a lot of preparation to figure out what their challenges are and figure out which story best solves their problem that they're most likely to see themselves in. So I can give you an example of a story. So one of the techniques in storytelling is an open loop. Have you heard that concept before?
Yep.
So you sort of tease something out. TV shows do it all the time. That's why we keep binge watching. You gotta wait for what happens next. You want to start that process as early as possible. And I have people do it when they introduce me. So instead of just reading my bio, the introduction is customized. And they'll say, oh, John's going to talk to us about when he met Michael Phelps and a lesson he learned that we can apply. That's an open loop. I don't open my talk with a Michael Phelps story, but I do it within the first 10, 15 minutes. And then people go, oh, I was waiting for that. Keeps them engaged.
Okay. I love that. Well, I mean, since you open a loop there, tell us the Michael Phelps story.
Well, I was waiting to see if you were going to keep that up, because I wanted that, instead of me just launching into it, I wanted people to see that's what happens when you create an open loop. People want to close that loop. So you're intriguing them. That's the whole goal even of a good elevator pitch. Is you want to intrigue people enough to say, well, tell me about that. So in this case, like, listen, if you don't want to hear the Michael Phelps story, that's fine. If you're in an audience, I'm going to tell it. But in this one-on-one, I just give it the open loop enough. And you're like, I would like to hear that, please. So that's what creates collaborative conversation. Remember, your whole goal is not to just be, oh, I'm a great storyteller. It's to have an emotional connection and a collaborative conversation with everyone, whether it's one person or an audience, hundreds.
So I'm curious. So essentially, the open loop is like a hook, right? And you're not attached to any particular hook. You just drop hooks all over the place, and then if they pick it up, they pick it up.
And you let them figure out which one they want to pull down from that shoebox. I've said 3 or 4 things that might intrigue you, and they go, well, what's that? Tell me more about this. And each one of them has a story ready to go in the structure that I've told.
Right. So my question is, how did you select the hook? Right. How did you have developed the awareness, the sensibility to say this story is a good hook, for example?
Well, that goes into the genres of storytelling, which we can talk about. How do I find my stories, basically, is what I think the question is. And how do I know a story is relevant? So a story by itself is not relevant unless there's some resolution to it. I think that's the first insight. And then, there's 4 kinds of storytelling genres. There's the rags to riches, the Cinderella kind of movie. She's poor by the fireplace, and then she gets remade and has this wonderful life. And then, Oprah, her own personal story is definitely rags to riches. And a lot of brands are using this. I was talking to the CMO of Ann's Pretzels, which is an airport malls, and I said, how does this all start? Oh, she sold pretzels at one farmer's market. Wow, that's a rags to riches story. So that story of origin, using that genre, is one. Another one is Rebirth. It's a Wonderful Life, a holiday Christmas movie. You're like, ooh, maybe I do have an impact. I want a do-over. Prudential uses this campaign for retired people. This is your third act. It's a rebirth. It's not just a continuation of middle age. So people go, oh. So there's all kinds of genres that you can study and learn and figure out what genre you want to tell. Which genre does your brand fit in, and which story. There's movies that use it, and there's brands that use it. So it's part of learning what all the different genres of storytelling and figuring out which genre you want to be telling a story in.
What are the other 2? You say there are 4.
I did. I was just
so now I'm intrigued. Please tell me. Close the loop. Yes.
Quest, which is the Lord of the Rings movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Lexus, one of their taglines was the pursuit of perfection on that quest. And then the 4th one is decide to leave home and have an adventure and then come back and tell everybody about it. That's clearly the Wizard of Oz using that. And Expedia uses it. Go have an adventure, book it on Expedia, and then come back and tell all your friends about it.
I'm trying on the size, right? What does Noble Warrior fall into? I would say probably more on the quest, the hero's journey, right? This is Kaizen, this ever lasting improvement, this pursuit for self-actualization and self-transcendence. Definitely is a very archetypal story that we fall into right here. So
which loops back to what I was saying earlier, which is because you fix one issue of I'm only valuable if I look my best, then another issue comes up for healing. So it's like peeling an onion. It's a continuous journey. There is no real destination where you go, well, I'm totally enlightened. I never have a moment of doubt or fear, or I'm always happy. It's not the goal.
Yeah, for sure. To me, if someone comes to me that says my life is perfect, and I would say to that person, congratulations. And, most of us, 99.9999999% of the humans on the planet don't have what you have. So, blessings to you, kind of a thing. So, okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that. So if I'm also hearing what you say is, you didn't say this, but you say it implicitly, is you look at life through the lens of stories. So even if you're having regular conversations with people, even if you are watching TVs or YouTube videos, you look at it through the lens of stories. Is that accurate?
Yes, in fact, I work for an ad agency creating commercials for movies. So I really honed my storytelling skills there. You take a 2 hour movie and have to cut it down to 30 seconds and figure out who's going to want to go see this movie uh, based on what scenes we pull out of that 30 seconds. That's what basically an elevator pitch is. So, yes, everything you see through the problem solution lens is how you move people to engage with you from a selling perspective. And the best way to do that is through telling stories that people see themselves in, and that you're the one taking them on that journey. So,
Do you feel that?
Mhm.
Go ahead,
So,
finish your thought.
do you want to hear the Michael Phelps story, or you have another question for me?
Oh yeah, yeah. Please, I forgot. Please do tell us a Michael Phelps story.
When I was selling advertising for a fashion magazine at Conde Nast about 15 years ago now, Speedo was in my territory, and they were coming out with a line of sportswear. And I went to them and I said, "Would you consider advertising that in my fashion magazine?" They said, "No, we're going to be in a sports magazine." And I said, "Well, what if?" And tapped into the right brain, imagination, painted a picture. We treated your sportswear like it was high fashion, and hired models to wear it on a fashion show around a hotel pool. And you could invite Michael Phelps. He's on your payroll as a spokesperson. He was in the middle of his Olympic career during that time. And we get all kinds of publicity for you. And they said, "Oh, that is okay, we'll do it." So I got some advertising that wasn't expected. But for me personally, meeting Michael Phelps as former lifeguard was thrilling. So I said to him, "Michael, everyone says you're such a successful swimmer because your feet are like fins and you have a bigger lung capacity than most people. But I'm guessing there's something else." He said, "Yes, John. When I was young, my coach said to me, 'Michael, are you willing to work out on Sundays?' 'Yes, coach.' 'Great. We just got 52 more workouts in a year than your competitors.' The question becomes, what are you willing to do that your competition isn't or hasn't even thought to do?"
I love
So
that.
that's one of my signature stories. And you can see how it followed the exposition, how that happened, how I happened to meet Michael Phelps. There's stories within the stories. Obviously, I'm showing a story of me selling somebody something, and some selling techniques within that, like asking a what if question. And then you saw me acting out the dialogue in real time when I'm telling the story. And looking down, I'm the coach. Looking up, I'm young Michael. Back to the coach. All of those are storytelling techniques.
Yeah, thank you for illustrating some of the mechanics of it. Because for the untrained eyes, you are just natural at it, but this is very intentional with a
Yes.
lot of the different gesticulations that you did. So,
Also, you
so I
can watch
want.
stand-up comics like Jerry Seinfeld or even Ellen on their one-person Netflix or HBO shows, and you'll see them doing that a lot.
So this is actually perfect because there's a few direction I want to take it. The one of the let's see. So one of the things that I admire most about Dave Chappelle is his ability to focus on the mundane and then just turn it into an hour show just based on something that nobody would think was funny, or Louis C.K. or Jerry Seinfeld or Allen, very very similar, right? So to me, that's more of the Olympic level of storytelling because you're just picking something that's super mundane and you're able to look at it through a new lens and do your mechanics or mastery of storytelling that you're able to actually just, make the whole stadium laugh and so forth. So, what's your take on that? I'm curious to know. When you see someone as a master storytelling yourself, what's your visceral reaction when you see them able to pick something super mundane and just make something a whole huge story out of it?
Well, one of the reasons why a lot of comics use air travel as a story they use is because most people have been on a plane. And so they're constantly searching for what is something everyone's experienced. And yet, if I look at it through a different lens, it seems a little crazy. So something as simple as, oh my God, do we really still need someone to show us how to buckle a seatbelt at this point in our lives? You're like, oh, we've all experienced that. That yet when a comedian points something out like that, it seems a little absurd. So that you're looking for something that seems relatively mundane and looking at it through a different lens of why is this something that we still need to talk about or be shown? What planet? Have you ever met a person that doesn't know how to do that? What generated that idea in the first place? Did they suddenly just see a bunch of people struggling and said one day, "Oh my God, we got to show everybody how to do this"? So it's just one little thing. You just keep asking more and more questions about what else is funny if this is funny. I actually interviewed a stand-up comic, and I was talking about the opening to one of my talks, which is about the first thing I do every morning is take a cold shower. It burns fat, it reduces inflammation, and fights depression. And I said, actually, it had me, it burns fat. And then I laugh. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was working on that, I actually was telling a friend that. And when actually it had me, it burns fat, I just spontaneously said that to him, and he laughed. And I thought, I wasn't trying to be funny. I was just being me. I wonder if that would be funny in front of an audience. And then I was talking to the humor stand-up specialist, and he said, well, we would really test it like you would an ad and say, is it funnier if I say burns fat at the end or in the middle or at the beginning? And then here's the technique I think you really like, you taught me, which is, if this is funny, what else is funny? So after I say that, actually it had me at burns fat, people laugh, I said, so now I don't even work out anymore. All I do is take 3 cold showers a day.
That's funny. I like that.
But there was a process to it, yes?
I see.
If that's funny, then else is funny.
So what I'm hearing between the lines, again, I don't want to project, but I want to make sure I'm catching everything that you're saying here.
Mm-hmm.
So be open. Well, one, just be yourself, throw things out there, and then also pay attention to what generated the intended outcome that you have. Whether it's being inspiring or getting a laugh or getting the sale, whatever, pay attention to that and use that as a data point to further extrapolate. What else? If this is funny, what else is funny? If this is effective, this is achieve the intention that I want. Yes. What else? Along the same line, can I exaggerate certain things or extrapolate a little bit more or ask a different question to achieve even a bigger outcome? Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I love the fact that you use that. So did you actually do stand-up comedy for a little bit as a way to test your storytelling skills?
No, I was in theater and I've done a little bit of improv. And ironically, for those who don't know, improv is all about yes and. You don't judge, you shut something down. And Anthem Insurance was interviewing me versus another speaker. And you have to sell yourself to get hired. And I asked them a question, which was, if I get hired to be your speaker and open this 2-day summit, what else is happening after I speak? And they said, at the end of the first day, we're going to have an improv session. And people are going to be on stage, it's going to be the doctors, it's going to be the Anthem people, and the audience is going to shout out objections and see how they do in an improv session. And I said my magic 2 words, what if I stayed and would be on stage with them during the improv, and I could whisper in their ear if they got stuck, something I'd said in my talk to keep the conversation going and handle the objection. And they said, oh my God, we never even thought of asking anybody to do that. And I went from just being interesting and maybe a little intriguing to being irresistible. Because I did the Michael Phelps thing. I offered them something my competitors either weren't willing to do because they wanted to get on the next plane out, or hadn't thought to do.
I love that.
And then
Do
when it happened, they said, "Oh my God, can you be in my ear all the time when I'm in the field? You really are the whisperer."
I love that. So now let's get into, is this what you naturally do as a way to see where you can add value anytime, anywhere, any place with anyone?
Yes. Well, I teach people how to go from invisible to irresistible, and the importance of realizing where you are on that ladder, and constantly asking myself, "Okay, I'm just interesting right now. They are talking to me. What can I do to get intriguing? What can I do to become irresistible?" So I'm walking my talk. And sometimes that's future pacing somebody. You've heard that concept, I'm sure.
Go ahead and elaborate for our listeners.
Yeah, so you did it in the reverse. If I'm talking to my younger self, I do it. Let's imagine we're having a conversation a week after the event. What would have to happen for you to feel really ecstatic and happy that this was the best one ever? And then they start picturing themselves in that. In fact, from a practical standpoint, I've worked with people interviewing for a job, and that's all about telling a story and taking your experience and turning it into a story, and then asking that question when it comes to the end of the interview, when they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" And unfortunately, a lot of young people think, "Oh, how much vacation time do I get, and when does it start?" So the new question I give people is, what would it look like if I was to exceed your expectations in this job? I had somebody get hired on the spot because you're not saying you're someone who goes above and beyond. You're having them visualize yourself in the job already, and then having them visualize what it looks like to exceed expectations. And they probably haven't even thought about that because they've just come up with the format of here's what the job requirements are. The fact that you're asking that question shows me, instead of telling me, that you're going to go above and beyond the minimum. And that's what we want. The skills we can teach, we want the mindset of that.
That was very ninja. I love that. I really do. Part of I'm a connoisseur of questions, because I truly believe that the quality of life is a direct reflection of the quality of the questions that we ask. And if we ask shitty questions, we're gonna have shitty life. We're gonna ask great questions, we're gonna have a much better life, right? So hence why the podcast is all about asking questions. What does it take to have a life of purpose, joy, and meaning, right? And because that's a much better question is, why does the world suck, right? So I love that question. That was very, very ninja. That was awesome. I love it.
Good.
So I'm curious, as a fellow podcast host, and this is something that I'm having an inquiry of. I wanted to have a public inquiry with you. The way I see it in the beginning was, hey, how do I, use this as a way to attract an audience, of some people, some other noble warriors who was on this quest, with me. Then it dawned on me that, hey, I've had 90 people who is, on this path already, who are thought leaders in their own right, who are also, how do I actually create value for them? So I'm curious to know, I know that you've been on this journey as a podcast host since 2018, if I recall correctly. You've done hundreds.
Yeah, they're on 300 episodes now, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I'm curious to know how, if we frame it as you have had relationship with 300 plus people who are thought leaders in their own right, who also want to use storytelling as a way to advance other people's lives and their own life, and also share positive message with the world, who's committed on that path. How are you being the hub and spoke, right, and adding, or how could you rather add more value to this network of beautiful human beings that you have gather?
Well, one of the things I did is I turned 10 of my favorite episodes into a book. And I called it the same. The book was called The Successful Pitch, just like the podcast. And all the guests that I asked if I could take the transcripts from the episode and turn it into a chapter said yes. and then they helped promote the book. So they loved it because they got their message out in another format. I also take the transcripts from my episode and turn it into a LinkedIn article. So they've got content without having to write a word. They can post on their website and share it to their LinkedIn community. And then, of course, it's the right introduction. Keeping all those people in my head so that, like a jukebox again, when someone says, "Oh, I'm looking for someone who does this," that's why it's so important to have a great elevator pitch so people instantly know who you help and what problem you solve. Oh, you need to meet this person. So you become the hub, as you described, that connects all of your guests to what they are looking for. So I've interviewed a lot of investors, and they said, "Listen, if people have hired you to help them with their pitch, you know what I like to invest in, I'll take the meeting." Well, great, that's a win for everybody. I've interviewed a lot of speaking bureaus who represent me because I created content for them to help them distinguish themselves from other bureaus. That becomes a PR tool. So there's a lot of different ways you can provide value for your guests.
I love that. How did you, by the way, John, how did you hone into this particular profession or dharma or path or this thing that you want to focus on? Hey, I'm gonna double down on storytelling / sales as a way to hone as my X factor, as my superpower.
Well, I think we have to go back and get the whole picture.
Sure.
For it to be relevant. So I majored in advertising. I loved the entertainment aspect of it, combined with the business aspect of it. I was fascinated by what motivated people, persuaded people to either take an action or change brands or whatever it was. And then I started my career selling these multi-million-dollar computers and really learned the basics of selling against a big competitor like IBM, and realized that it wasn't just about having something that was less expensive or more reliable or faster. There's a lot of psychological issues going on. So back then, if you bought something that wasn't IBM, they would point the finger at the other vendor and say, "It's their fault this thing went down, and you're going to get fired for bringing that other vendor in." I was like, wow, it's not just left-brain decision-making here. And then working for the ad agency, learning about converting movies into commercials and convincing other studios to hire our agency, that we were, quote, a better storyteller, and having a story of that. A movie we take that didn't do well theatrically, but we helped do well in home video. And then selling advertising for all these different brands and explaining the editor's vision and their voice and how that attracted a certain kind of reader that would then fit whatever that launch of that car was or what that jean company was trying to do. And so it was always through that lens of storytelling. And then I just realized that the better I told stories, the more likely I was to get a sale. And in fact, Lexus's agency would have what they call media day, and they'd invite multiple salespeople to come in and pitch. I said, "Don't talk to us about the numbers. We've already looked that up. That's why you're in the final selection. Come to us with a story, an idea, a concept of how you're going to help this work beyond just the ad in the magazine." So all of those things combined to go, oh, I need to connect the dots. And when I was selling, I thought I've had 3 separate careers: tech, advertising, entertainment business, and now ad sales. And then they said, there's this thing called the internet, and we're going to have to start putting website addresses on our ad. Advertisers are going to start advertising. Anybody know anything about technology? And I do. And then, we're not going to just put models on magazines of fashion, and we're going to put celebrities. Anybody have an entertainment background? Oh, I do. So all of these experiences that you think are so siloed contribute to making you better wherever you are. And now the last 7 years or so, it's all been about, here I see a problem that I can solve, especially for tech people, and especially for people in the healthcare industry, that they're not telling stories, and they aren't aware that they need to, and then they don't know how to. And but once they do, they start winning new business. Then that's my niche. So it's a continual process, just like the speaking gets better and better. Your laser focus of who I help and what problem I solve, having stories ready to go, like the one I gave you of Olympus, 30% faster turning into that heartwarming story. That when you tug at people's heartstrings, they open their purse strings.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much I can go into. So for someone who is listening to this, right? Because you had talked about a lot of the external, the circumstances shift. You know how you hone your skills in advertising, in entertainment, in sales, as a way to hone yourself as a polymath of storyteller, right? But I also wanted to kind of hone in on the inner journey aspect of it, from the unconscious competence to conscious, unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. There's a journey of, I don't know if I could do it, right? There's a jump of doing that. So, could you share with us a little bit about, let's see, how would I ask this question in a better way? What beliefs are required? What new mindset did you need to take on as a way to continue to walk down the path of being a master storyteller?
I think the first belief, myth that you have to let go of is that if people get to know, like, and trust you, they'll buy from you. We've heard that forever. And the problem is that behavior that people have to get to know me before they trust or like me causes me to push out a bunch of information about me and my company and my product. And then the second myth is people don't buy logically, they buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. Oh, so what do I need to do to fix those two myths? Well, you have to start with trust, which is a gut thing. That's where the handshake, remember when we used to shake hands? Show that you didn't have a weapon in your hand. So you need to build trust. Then it goes to the heart. Do I like you? And you show that through empathy. And then it goes to the head, and it's still not about pushing out information. The unspoken question people have is, will this work for me? And if they can't see it working for themselves, they won't buy it. So that's why storytelling is so valuable, because when people see themselves in the story, they go, oh, well, this would work for me because I see myself in that story.
I see. So the story embedded the trust, the like, and the what was the other one?
Knowing.
The head, right? The knowing.
Gut, heart, head. Yep.
I like that. Well, I'm definitely a convert for sure. I'm on my path to be a master storyteller. Well, one of the things that I'm also curious about is, and this is something I'm trying to articulate the best that I can. So in startup land, there is product market fit,
Yep.
right? But what's even more important is founder market fit, like why you. So in my mind, translating that similar concept to stories, are there storyteller fit that you think about? So for example, I'll give you a great example. I'm really passionate about understanding what it takes to have a fulfilling life. But do I embody, fulfillment and passion? I don't think so, right? But it's a problem I'm really passionate in solving, because as an overachiever, if I don't focus on it, I have seen many times the end of the tunnel, and there's no cheese in the end. And I realized that achievement is no way, no means to have a great life. It is a part of it, but it's not the whole equation, right? So if I want to ultimately optimize for a fulfilling life, I gotta focus on that versus trying to achieve something as a proxy to have achievement. My point of sharing all of that is, do I embody fulfillment? I don't think so. I'm not the Dalai Lama. I'm not, the happiest monk, with the EEG hooked on my brain to say that. So I'm curious to know, as a advisor, as a super coach, as someone who wants to hone their story, do you think about storyteller fit at all, or is that something that's a irrelevant thing that you don't even think about?
We have a couple concepts here. The why you is definitely what the story of origin answers. And if you've been in the shoes of the people who you're helping, then the investors think, oh, you have empathy for, you really understand this problem better than everybody else. That's what gives you the expertise to solve it. So that's one part of that. The other part of it is people are either internally motivated or externally motivated to take action. So when I was working with Lexus and they were launching, they said, we don't have the history that BMW and Mercedes does. But some of those buyers buy it because they need to impress their friends with the logos and brag about owning it. But there's a whole other group of people that are internally motivated that buy it because of the workmanship or the craftsmanship or because it's fun to drive. And they don't really care what the label is. They make their decisions for themselves. And that's who we need to target to put Lexus on that short list of cars that they're going to consider. And so my job was to convince them that the fashion advertisers of big brand names like Gucci and Versace had the same thing. Certain people bought it for the label. Certain people bought that purse or shoe for their workmanship and because they liked it for themselves and they weren't trying to impress people with it. And so the premise of that awareness of why we take action and how achievement falls into that is, I think, really important for your own personal growth. Am I achieving this because I need to have all this certain number of listeners or monetizing this way for me to feel like it was a worthy endeavor? Or am I internally motivated to interview people, to build my network and learn from them and get like a masterclass from them and possibly contribute some way back to them? And that's how I'm defining success. And then you're totally free from looking outside of yourself to decide if you're happy or successful. You do. When you shift it to, I'm happy now, not as soon as I do this many episodes or as soon as I sell this many books or as soon as I make this much money. Because as you said, it's empty because once you achieve something like we did, it's okay, what's next? What's next? So you just got to get off that as soon as mental game. As soon as I get this, then I'll be happy because it doesn't last very long.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a lesson that I had to learn many, many times, right? The in order to, that once I get this, then I'll be X, right? If I'm happy or whatever. It's just try that many, many times, and it's a tunnel with no cheese in the end. And I realized like, oh, okay, I really got to change, right? My whole mindset around it. So these days for me is, am I enjoying this in this very moment? I'm enjoying my time with John, right? Versus I'll be satisfied when I hit X. And that's just, I think Jim Carrey said it so well in his commencement speech. He says, the likelihood, life is full of failures. The probability is really, really high of failing. You might as well go after what you really love. So that's the new paradigm I'm operating from, right? Focusing on the process, not the destination, because the destination you may never get there. You probably won't. So I appreciate that. Very cool, man. So a few more questions. So as a master storyteller, now you have a story, you have honed in your why, you have honed in your what, you have honed in your deliverable, you have honed in the beats of the story. How do you then take what you have as a story and ride the waves of the zeitgeist of the time? Because I'm assuming, projecting, correct me if I'm wrong, now you have this tool then you can ride the waves of the media and just say I'm relevant because of here and that and the other thing. I'm curious now how you find relevance to what's happening in our day.
I can give you two examples. Last September, a year ago, I got interviewed by NBC when it was back to school time. And it was like, John Livesay is here to help parents get more than one word answers from their kid when they say, how was your day? They typically say fine or okay. And I said, ask your child, tell me a story about the best part of your day. That's not a one word answer. And they can decide if it's the beginning, before they got to school, what happened in school, or on the way home. And then you can tell them a story about the best part of your day and bond that way. And so since you love questions so much, I thought that's how I got publicity from my book and me by tapping into what's going on. Kids are back to school. Here's a problem parents are having, getting one word answers. Here's a solution that's a nice soundbite, an easy takeaway.
Yeah.
The other example is, as I talked about going from invisible to irresistible, in the middle of that run is interesting. And I had said to my publicist, oh, it's like being stuck at the friend zone at work. So many salespeople get excited. Oh, they're interested. They want more material. And they'll never buy. And they said, oh, can you come up with 3 ways to tell her that you're stuck at the friend zone at work and 3 ways to get out? And they pitched that, and both Fortune and Inc. magazine wrote articles on it and interviewed me.
Do you need to get some more water?
I think I'm good.
Okay. So what's happening right now is the election, right? What's happening right now is COVID. How would you parlay the stories that you have as a way to ride that media wave to help more people tell better stories?
Well, the pandemic has created a problem for especially healthcare salespeople who were used to able to walk into doctors' offices or catch a doctor between surgeries at the hospital, and now they can't do that. So they have a new need. They need some help on crafting an email to request a virtual meeting. And if you've never had to do it, you don't know how to do it. And then even if you get the virtual meeting, you don't know how to look and sound good on Zoom. Your lighting's not good, your mic's not good, your camera's not good, you get nervous speaking on camera versus in person. So those 2 things alone have created a huge need for companies to hire me to help them with just those 2 things alone, let alone then going out and help them tell better stories to win.
Got it. I guess I'm asking is the way to think about it, or the metacognition. A few clarifying points here. How do you find the zeitgeist of the time? 1, 2 is then how do you find the correlation between the story that you already have and the service that you provide and so on and so forth to what you found as the zeitgeist? Can you share with us a little bit about how you think about a way to find the relevance?
It's talking to people and asking them questions. What frustrates you most about your kids coming home from school? Or what's the biggest challenge your sales team is facing during the COVID? Getting a virtual meeting. Okay. Now I know that's a problem. Talk to some other people. You struggling with this too? Yes. Okay. Now we know it's not just one company's struggle. And then from there you create a solution.
I see. Get curious, ask questions. What are your biggest problems? Oh, so on that note, how do you, because it's easy for them to say the obvious, right? I'm struggling with sales. I want more leads. These are some of the indicators, the symptoms. How do you get to what they're really struggling with? Because they may not necessarily feel safe enough to share with you what they're really struggling with. They may share with you some of the symptoms that's a little bit more okay to share. Does that make sense? How do you get to the...
Well, you tell the story of another client and you say, does that sound like anything that you can relate to? And then they go, oh, yeah, we saw ourselves in that. A lot of our sales teams are in silos and they're not communicating with each other, so it makes it really hard for us to go to a hospital or a doctor that's only using one of our services and let them know we do other things because we don't know how to break those silos down. And you're telling us that storytelling can do that, then we're intrigued to know more. Remember, your whole goal is just to intrigue people to get the next conversation.
Got it. The next step versus the whole shebang on the first thing. Do you mind staying on for a few more minutes for some rapid fire questions? Is that
Sure.
cool? Awesome. Very good. You sure you don't want to get some water?
I'm good.
Okay, excellent. All good, dude. Wonderful. So, rapid fire questions. What movies have shifted the way that you look at reality?
Shawshank Redemption, on so many levels, that we can put our body in prison but not our mind. We can be accused of something we didn't do and not get resentful. The concept of perseverance, concept of friendship, and the need to reinvent ourselves. Most people get out of prison and they miss the structure and are miserable. So all of those, so many great lessons in that movie.
I love it. Thank you. What's your definition of purpose?
My definition of purpose is knowing why I want to get out of bed in the morning, beyond making money or survival.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. What's your definition of fulfillment?
My definition of fulfillment is when I get feedback from people and I see a light bulb moment happen when they learn something about storytelling, or they tell me that storytelling has benefited them personally, not just in their career. It really makes me feel happy.
Thank you. What's your definition of wealth?
My definition of wealth is beyond money. Wealth of friends, wealth of health, and just an overall abundance of everything that allows me to create and contribute.
Beautiful. What do you do to not take yourself too seriously?
Well, I have my family for that. I was working with a relatively famous rock and roll drummer on helping him with his stories. And he wrote me this email. He said, "Oh, you're a badass. You know, this is somebody who wears tattoos and sunglasses all the time." And that was never my crowd in school. And so I sent my sister that comment with a link to his website, and she sent me back a thing of Bobby Brady from the Brady Bunch dramatically playing the drums. She goes, "You're about as badass as Bobby Brady was in the Brady Bunch." So that keeps me from not taking myself too seriously.
Keeps you humble. How do you do that in the moment, though? In how some serious things or circumstances happen? How do you just like, oh, okay, it's part of this impermanence, right? It's I think in your talk it said the fluidity of life. How do you when serious circumstances happen, how do you just not take it so seriously and just flow with it?
I have my 5-5-5 exercise. Will this bother me in 5 minutes? Will this bother me in 5 days or 5 weeks from now? I zoom out and I keep going. It's like, okay, 5 months, 5 years, and usually by then I'm like, oh, that's not gonna bother me in the big picture.
Thank you. Beautiful. In the last 5 years, what new beliefs, behavior, or habit have most improved your life?
I would say the biggest thing would be to stop comparing myself to other people. That gives me a whole sense of freedom of, I deserve to be here. I have something of value. People want to pay for it. I don't have to audition or try so hard. that who I am is enough, and the right people find me from all kinds of ways without me having to stress out about if I'm doing everything perfectly.
That's beautiful. What is the book other than yours that you've given most as a gift, and why?
Probably the Four Agreements.
Hmm.
It's just the one about don't take anything personally. And then go, oh, do your best. All right, those are just those two alone is enough to help most people get unstuck.
I love that. So, John, I wanted to take a few minutes to really acknowledge you for how you've shown up in our conversation. You know, from the first times that we've met, the first few times that we've met, what's really clear to me watching you coaching people through their pitch is your sincerity to really help them unleash this idea, this desire that they so desperately want to share with the world. And you do it with kindness, you do it with grace, you do it with elegance, and you do it with just the deep listening so that you are also able to articulate what they're really trying to say. And I just want you to know that from a noble warrior to another, that I see you, I see the work that you do, and the mastery that you have in helping people uncover their story. And thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for the way that you showed up in this conversation. I know that, you know, I tend to get a little philosophical, but your willingness to dance with me in this conversation is magnificent. So thank you so much for being here and share with your wisdom and your stories and your tactics with my audience.
My pleasure, and thanks for that kind acknowledgement. I think we all want to be seen and heard and acknowledged, and that's the best gift of kindness we can ever give. So thank you. I received that with a lot of gratitude.
Very good. But one last thing I forgot to mention. So for those of you who are interested, who are committed to actually taking action to hone their storytelling skills, go to John's website, go from invisible to irresistible.com. You can get his course and better selling through storytelling.
Yes,
Thanks,
and if
John,
you
for
want
being here.
to get a free gift from me, just take out your phone and text the word pitch, PITCH, to this number, 66866, and I'll send you a free PDF of my top storytelling tips.
Amazing. Thank you, John.
Thank you.